And I'm firmly convinced that justice and freedom for women are things worth securing, not only for their own value, but for civilization itself. I think that's a rather nice ending, and shows understanding and commitment and involvement with young people. Young people are always important to her. I talked for too long, so I'll stop, and please do ask any questions you want.
Thank you so much. Any questions, please? Yes.
As Master of Birkbeck, were there particular ways that you were influenced by Millicent? She was rather standing behind your shoulder, living in the cottage, wasn't she?
Well, I came out to be honest with you. I can't say that Millicent was at the forefront of my mind when I arrived at Birkbeck. What I really wanted to do was to make sure this college survived, because it was in danger of collapsing altogether as a result of a change to the way part-time students were funded by the then Funding Council. So I had to fight to get that reversed, and then to start raising money outside. I had to reorganise the college so that it was more efficient. I had to expand it. So we took the University Department of Extramural Studies into Birkbeck, so that produced thousands more students. Start new departments in law and in management studies, close some departments that were too small and not working. So it was very much, what kind of vision have I got to make sure that this place is going to be somewhere that people who missed out first time round would be able to study, but also how we could develop good research so that we had a healthy group of masters and PhD students. So I think I would be being dishonest if I said that Millicent really influenced me at that stage, but I know that she would have been on the side of Birkbeck.
Any other questions? Yes, over there.
Thank you. A really interesting talk. Thank you very much. What do you think Millicent would have thought of women's struggles, air quotes, today? Would you be pleased with the progress that's been made?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. First of all, I think she would have been absolutely astounded by the progress that women have made. After all, when she died, there were about 15 or 16 women MPs. They had been allowed to stand in 1918 when the Act went through for women's suffrage. But any one woman was elected, and she was a Sinn Féin member, so didn't take up her seat. She, I think, would be astounded to turn up in the House of Commons and be able to sit and watch it in a rather better place than she could when she was around, when they sat behind a grill in uncomfortable seats, boiling hot, and to come and see that 41% of MPs are now women, and 51% of Labour MPs are women, to see a front bench with a Deputy Prime Minister, a Chancellor, a Leader of the House of Commons, a Home Secretary, etc., all women. She would have been utterly amazed, totally delighted. On the other hand, she would also still be arguing that we haven't got to the point where women have equal opportunities in many spheres. We still see top jobs being occupied in the private sector largely by men. She would have thought that this was not right and that there should be much more effort put to allowing women to become the chairs and chief execs of big companies. She would have been concerned that there was not good enough support for mothers with small children, and would have argued, I think, for better childcare. I think she would have also wanted to see a situation where the professions, not just the private sector, were more open to having people at the top who were women and not just men in all these jobs. And of course, many women have broken through, but the majority of these positions are still occupied by men. So I think it would be a mixture. But I think the Fawcett Society, which is named after her, which doesn't actually talk about her ever, but talks about the things that still have to be done, would be something that she would back, and she might give money to it. She was a very generous donor, incidentally, to a lot of causes. She inherited quite a lot of money from her father, and she inherited some money from when her husband died, and she used it judiciously to support the causes she cared for. She was never grand. She was, as a young woman, she was beautiful, and also very, very nicely dressed. And her husband, who couldn't see what she was wearing, used to ask his friends, "Please tell me what Willie is wearing. I want to know what she looks like." So he had that kind of interest. So she dressed for her husband in part, even though he couldn't see what she was wearing. So I think it would be mixed what she would say now.
Anyone else?
And the earliest country to give books to you, Professor?
Yeah. New Zealand. New Zealand was the first country, followed by Australia. Then the Scandinavian countries came next, but not Sweden. Sweden was later. Then after the First World War, as well as the UK giving votes to women, so did, I think, the Netherlands, Germany, Russia after the 1917 revolution, and then in the very early 1920s, the USA and Sweden followed. So, and then later more came. But yes, we have to congratulate the New Zealanders and their foresight.
Could I ask you?
One more question,
Yes. Okay.
I just wondered if you think it would have succeeded without direct action
Well, my own view is that because the suffragettes were obviously hugely visible, they did attract a lot of attention and a lot of support. She recognised that. She said, they're doing things that we haven't been able to do. And she learned from them in the sense that, she started these big marches across London, and some of them was a march that went from all over the country into London, and then having big demonstrations in places like Hyde Park or the Albert Hall or wherever, where she always spoke. So I think she actually made more difference though, because she was the one who actually, in the end, got to the politicians and the decision makers. Whereas in the end, I think the Pankhursts alienated that group of people, who after all wanted the power. And I think they also alienated people around the country who didn't like seeing their letters going up in smoke in a letterbox, or didn't think that you should smash windows to achieve what they wanted to. It's interesting that what happened to Emmeline Christabel, whereas Millicent, remained true to her cause to her death. Emmeline spent a lot of time in the United States, even during the First World War. She had no money, and she was less fortunate than Millicent, who was never short of money. Millicent wasn't terribly rich, but she had plenty of money to do what she wanted to do. She went on lecture tours that could last up to a year in the US. And again did that in the early 20s. She also ended up, she was quite disturbed, I think, in some ways, Emmeline, although she was a charismatic speaker, very beautiful, wonderful voice. She actually stood as or was nominated to stand as a Conservative candidate in the 1920s, but died just before the election. Now that's a big switch to a party that had always been collectively, although there were individuals who took a different view, opposed to women's votes. And her daughter Christabel became a fanatical Seventh Adventist to spend the rest of her life as a preacher going around the United States. So that's a really odd switch as well.
Great.
One more?
Okay, one more, and then we have a look at these books.
This one.
Yes.
Along with the, oh, you want me to?
Yeah.
It seems like along with the progress we've made for women, there's also a rise in violence against women. I wonder if you could imagine, as well as what Millicent might, what lessons to learn, but also to speak personally, because I know you've been a real campaigner yourself, and I would really be interested in your views about that.
Well, I should have mentioned earlier to the question from the back what she would have said about violence against women and the Me Too campaign. She would have been horrified by it. And you know, she always believed that women should be respected. They shouldn't be beaten. And she always felt that within a marriage, women should be given the right to make decisions, and not just about what the children had for breakfast. She believed in genuine sharing in that way. But she would have been absolutely at the forefront of campaigning against violence towards women. And she would have seen it internationally as well as within the UK, because we know there are countries around the world where the extent of violence towards women is enormous and hugely worrying, and much worse than we see here, but of course it's a problem here. So on that subject, she would certainly have been campaigning now. I want to end by one other note about her. I'm sorry, I know you're probably going to soon end. I didn't, again, have time to tell you about her hinterland. She was a woman who, not only did she write books and read very widely, she was extremely musical. She went to concerts, she went to the opera, she went to Bayreuth, she was a Wagnerian. She went to exhibitions and was interested in painting, perhaps a bit conservative in her views about painting. I'm not sure that the Impressionists would have been quite her taste. More Victorian painters from the previous generation appealed to her. But she was also physically hugely energetic. When she was in Cambridge, she used to take young women walking on the tightrope, climbing ropes in the gyms. She walked, as she had as a child, that she walked around the coast of Suffolk and along the beaches, but she was a huge walker. She took her nieces and nephews and some of her sisters on trips to Switzerland doing alpine walks. She said the only thing about dying that really perturbed her was that she would never see Italy again. She wrote travel guides to Italian cities, and you know, always did her homework when she went anywhere abroad. So you know, she was a traveller, a walker. She used to go ice skating with Harry on the fens. He managed to skate even though he was blind, sometimes pulling a string. And the only thing she wouldn't do on the sporting front with Harry was fish. She thought fishing was an absurdity, and she couldn't abide it. It's because you sat down all day, and she was full of energy, like her sisters. So, final note. Thank you.
Thank you, that was a really interesting talk, and this is a small gift to you. Thank you from iu3a. And here are the books. If anyone is interested in getting a book, they're all here, and there are 3 different ways of paying, like I said. So do come.